We, do I sound audible to you guys? Or Wendy, do you want me to use this for other purposes?
You're good.
Okay, let's go without it then.
I think we're okay.
Great, good. It is an honor to be here. Thanks, Brad, for that was way more. I thought you were going to really destroy me up here before I got here. The spirit of colleagueship and all that. But it's an honor to be here. Thanks, especially for City House, for the Community Development Corporation. And I love the fact that it's in a library because I'm old enough to still feel like whatever a library is, it's the center of the town, wherever it is. So I feel like this is a great place. Libraries, generate energy of a particular kind that push people into the world in a way that's different from the way they started in the world. That's my take on it, at least. So we moved here 18 years ago in August of 1999. And we moved here from Paradise, Lancaster County. Paradise, Lancaster County. 4.5 hours east of here. So if it wasn't exactly Paradise Lost for us, it was Paradise Left. We'd be looking for houses. We're on these house buying expeditions from Lancaster, and we meet the people in the house, and they would say things like, "You're moving here from Lancaster? We go vacationing in Lancaster." But believe me, we were ready to leave a vacation spot. My favorite, if you've ever, how many of you have been to Lancaster? See, that's what I mean. That's exactly what I'm talking about. We lived in this part of Lancaster that's sort of that's where the oldish Amish community was, and we lived, between a guy who's actually the name on the mailbox was Christ Miller, which I realized only later was just an abbreviation for Christopher. That's the claim among the Amish, believe me. So Chris Miller on one, it's this really, beautiful spot. But the traffic was so clogged, thanks to people like you, that you had to develop these elaborate detours. You practically hit in Philadelphia if you want to go up to Harrisburg. It was just this very congested place. So my favorite bumper sticker in those years said, "Welcome to Lancaster County. Now go home." But we were 32 years old. I had lived 17 years of my life in Lancaster. My dad's from Bedford, my mom's from Johnstown. We had moved to Lancaster when I was in 3rd grade, before we ended up moving to Brazil where my parents were missionaries. So I had been there on and off, and it was, if not paradise, at least a cherished place. But I was very, very hopeful about moving out here. It was great to, for one thing, have a full-time job. But I always thought of myself as from Western Pennsylvania, even though we had moved further east, with my parents being where they were from, and I spent the first years of my life in Bedford County. I had grown up always cheering hard for the Steelers, for the Pirates, for the Panthers. Talk about this later, right? Work out at the Y next to the guy, I'm always in the locker room next to the guy who was Hopewell's basketball coach back in the day, when he coached Tony Dorsett, who you may know as Tony Dorsett, but he's correcting me on the true pronunciation. So it's sort of like, if like my 10-year-old self would have known a guy who knows Tony Dorsett, I would have thought I was in heaven for sure. We moved to the east, and I had to endure the fact that the Pirates and the Phillies were in the same division back in those days, the old days of National League East, and I wore my Pirates hats, with plenty of pride. In fact, I went to Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia one year in the late 70s, and I wore one of the stovetop Pirates hats, and I remember waving it at the Phillies fanatic, their mascot, and he stuck his tongue out at me, and I was so happy about that. I was like taking one for the team. We went to Three River Stadium. This is just a throw out for you baseball guys. We went to the Three River Stadium for the first homestand following the 1979 All-Star game. Anybody remember who the MVP of that All-Star game was? Dave Parker, who threw out 2 guys from right field, 2 remarkable throws. And more seriously, my grandmother from Johnstown spent the last several weeks of her life in Allegheny General Hospital. where I had visited her several times. So I felt at least, relieved to be moving out of the kind of high-pressure world of the East into something that still felt like Penn's Woods. I didn't know how far west Western PA actually was, though. You're like, you pass Monroeville, and then you feel like you're going to keep driving until you hit California. We had no connection to Beaver Falls, except for the fact that when I was in 3rd grade, and we had just moved to Lancaster, my parents bought us Joe Namath paraphernalia for Christmas. You know, the shoulder pads, the helmet, and all that. I played intramural soccer in seminary with a guy named David Howard, who was a Geneva graduate. I had a friend who had been here, a historian friend, and he described Beaver Falls as a grim little town that the Industrial Revolution forgot. Ouch. But he was from Philadelphia, so I said, whatever, Daryl. But our earliest impressions of Beaver Falls, live impressions of Beaver Falls, were framed by 2 men, both of the silent generation, one now deceased, the other one I think is still living. And they, for a few months, were our portal for this world that we were just getting to know. And I think talking about them may give us, may be helpful as we try to frame this ideal of local community and how to work towards civic renewal. So the one was a man named Lee, and the other is a guy we'll call Al. So with apologies to Charles Dickens, here's 2 tales of one town. Lee Trout was an elder in our church in Lancaster. And in the heart of his career, he had worked in public relations at Geneva College. When we told Lee that I had the interview at Geneva College, he leapt for joy, practically, figuratively. His eyes definitely leapt. He's now, by the way, his son is the current president of Geneva College, Calvin Trout. At the time, Lee was working in a consulting role for President Jack White. And he and his wife, Anita, right away when they heard that we had this invitation to come here, they invited us to their house in nearby Strasburg, and they pulled out photographs, memorabilia, the college history, anything connected to Beaver Falls, Geneva College, Beaver County, Western Pennsylvania. They described the place for us with intimate affection. They told us about the shopping possibilities, the churches, the lay of the land. They described people who I would go on to work with in very loving ways, a kind of unabashed outpouring of affection. It was really clear to us that they had loved Beaver Falls, and they wanted us to love it too. And they were so enthusiastic, and it was so heartwarming. And then after when I got here and actually got the job, Lee would show up every now and then at the college, and he'd take me out to eat, and he would take me to the Beaver Falls Eden Park. God rest its soul. Actually, even the building's here anymore. So that was Lee, this sort of unabashed affection, enthusiasm for this area that were their heart clearly still was. Then there was this guy, Al. And this is how I got to know Al. Right after we got the job, right after they made the offer, we got a phone call from somebody who was on faculty, and he said that a house on College Hill has just gone up for sale. It looks affordable. I think you should take a look because the market's really tight on College Hill. He said, okay. Now, the fact that it was affordable for us was something of a miracle because we had exactly $5,000 to make a down payment, and that was about the sum of all we had, period. So the down payment would have meant that we wouldn't eat for 4 or 5 weeks. That was okay. So we scurried out here. We had 2 boys at the time. Our oldest was 4. Our youngest was about 6 months. So we begin to tour Beaver County with this realtor, Al. He was very conversational. He had a kind of straight shooting charm. Try saying that 10 times in a row. No, actually, you might get embarrassed. Straight shooting charm. He was kind of fatherly in a kind of gruff way, but he was a veteran. He told us about the old Beaver Falls. He said that when he got back from the war, I think it was Korea, Friday nights at Beaver Falls was all of Western Pennsylvania shows up here. This sort of like this sort of energy that's in the town. He did tell us that when you drove over the bridge, you had to hold your nose. It smelled so bad. But he made sure, Al did, in very, very practical terms, that we had a picture of the place we were moving to. That was his key focus. And I believe then, and I still believe, that he really had our best interest in mind. I told him on one of our expeditions, I said, Al, you are going to forever be the face of Beaver Falls to me. And he kind of laughed and said, I hope not. But it turns out he's right. Here I am 18 years later, and I still have this very vivid image of him. But if we gushed a kind of buoyant hope, Al kind of oozed a this world realism, or at least realism, I'll put it like that. Realism of the it is what it is variety, right? Now, we needed serious realism, as I've said. We were in a very vulnerable situation in all ways. We were inexperienced. We were already in debt. We had 2 children. So we were listening for real-world realism. We needed somebody who could help us to evaluate risk, right? And somebody who could help us to think about what a wise investment would be in an unknown place. So it was a very valuable service. I'm still grateful for it. We looked at houses all over the place. We looked at houses on College Hill, White Township, Patterson Heights, which I would later come to learn described as Protestant Heights. Nice. I know there was not Protestant. Patterson Township, New Brighton, Big Beaver, Chippewa. All these names we're learning, we're absorbing, we're kind of following this guy around in this car. There's one place that Al never took us, where he refused to take us. Downtown Beaver Falls. Now, we knew nothing of Beaver Falls history. He didn't tell us a whole lot, right? But his explanation was simple. He said, you don't want to buy there because the property values are declining. Given your age, there's a very strong chance that you're going to leave within 5 years. So you want to make sure that if that's going to happen to you, you can sell. And we had to agree with him. I mean, everybody told us that it was a great place to raise a family. And we thought that was true. We had no sense of commitment. We had no sense of connection. The world looked wide open at age 32. The future looked unending. So we thought, yeah, that makes sense. So we bought a house on this tight budget in the Riverview district of Beaver Falls, which borders Patterson Township. If you look through the trees right now, you can see our house. Actually, it's on the first road that overlooks the town. And we've been grateful residents. It's a beautiful spot, beautiful place to live. It's the Beaver Falls School District. 18 years later, it's a contrast between Al and Lee that most strikes me. And this is what I'm going to propose and kind of get us in going in this direction. I don't think places like Beaver Falls can thrive without people like Lee, without that kind of buoyant hope that has that kind of energy. But I don't think they can survive without people who are at least somewhat like Al. That is, people who, as they think about the future, are going to keep a very gritty economic calculus right at the center of their thinking and are not going to let you let go of that, right? They're not going to let you plan for the future without thinking somewhere about what it takes to keep yourself afloat, to keep yourself from bankruptcy, right? To keep yourself moving forward, right? We need people who help us to identify promise, but we also need people who have the gifts and the ability to figure out how to make promise happen. And I think the world tends to be split between these two different types, right? That's what a lot of personality theorists say. A lot of literature has all kinds of typologies that are dependent on this, right? If you talk to any single mother, any school superintendent, any CEO of a nonprofit organization, dare I say, any member of a community development corporation, they'll tell you this is really true, right? We have to have this sort of economic perception right? Way of reading things as we think about this prospect of making something last, making something real. So here's my question. How do we here in Beaver Falls move toward promise while still operating fully in the present reality in all of its dimensions? How do you defeat the grim realism that the owls may tend toward while still maintaining an appropriate that needs to be defeated, right? But there's also kind of realism that needs to be celebrated, and that's what we try to think about. How do we keep promise and place together? How do we keep promise and place together? Well, I have a little, well, not too little, serious. We're going to look at and try to help us think about this. Not every day you get a teaching assistant like Brad Clyde.
Hey, Brad. There might not be enough for everyone.
I used to think, and by the way you describe the situation, it seems like promise is the easy part, right? It seems like promise is the easy part. Then you have this realism part. I used to think that way. I don't think that's true anymore. I think if we're talking about real promise, it requires eyes and character that are not easily obtained. Promise is more than just a warm feeling. So we had this poem here to try to help us think about this. This is a poem by a local writer, or at least from this region, named Maggie Anderson, from the tri-state region. It's a poem about our world. And I think you'll recognize pretty well the welter of feeling and thought that she takes us into. It's from a book of poems published by University of Pittsburgh Press. It's space filled with moving. I actually heard this poem. This is the only way I know this book. I was driving one day in Lancaster in 1997. I'll tell you, you'll see how I know this later. And I was listening to Garrison Keillor's Daily Almanac, and he read this poem, and I was so stunned by it that I stopped and wrote down the name of the poem, and I later got the book, and now it turns out you can go online and you can see the exact day when I heard it. That's because it's in my daily read. It's in November of 1997. So already, before I knew I was moving to Beaver Falls, I was thinking about Beaver County, thanks to Maggie Anderson, and it resonates with that Pennsylvania part of my identity. So I'm going to read this. Read along with me. A Place with Promise. Sometimes my affection for this place wavers. I'm poised between a vague ambition and loyalty to what I've always loved, hedged along inside my slow boat by warp and anchor drag. But if I imagine seeing this for the last time, this scruff of the borders of West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, shaped by hills and rivers, by poverty and coal, then I think I could not bear to go. Would grab any stump or tree limb and hold on for dear life. I keep trying to say what I notice here that's beautiful. There's the evening star riding the purple selvage of the ridges and the flat shine of the Ohio where men in folding chairs cast their lines out toward the backwash of the barges. There are the river names, the Allegheny, the Monongahela, the names of the tributaries, Fish Creek, Little Beaver, the town's name for function, Bridgeport, Martin's Ferry, or for what the early settlers must have dreamed of, prosperity and amity. Why can't we hold this landscape in our arms? The nettle-tangled orchards given up on, the broken fence posts with their tags of wire, burdock taking over uncut fields, the rusted tipples in the mills. Sometimes I think it's possible to wash the slag dust from the leaves of sycamores and make them green, the way, as a child, after lesson and punishment, I used to begin my life again. I'd say a little start to myself, like the referees at races. Then on the same old scratchy car seat, with the same parents, on the same road, I could live beyond damage and reproach. In a place with such promise, like any of the small farms among the wooded hills, like any of the small towns starting up along the rivers. Okay, I want to underscore a few things in the poem, and most fundamentally, I think it's worth pointing out that the loyalty she feels, right, that part that makes her feel like that if she was forced to leave, she'd grab a hold of any stump or tree and hold on for dear life. This has something to do with the vital sense of earthy connection that she feels to the place, right? The land itself, its beauty, she's connected to it. It's not just some sort of sentimental, harmony with nature type thing. It's just part of her being, part of her soul. The evening star riding the purple selvage of the ridges, the flat shine of the Ohio. I was teaching class this week, and I had to move into a new classroom, but the beauty of where I'm at now is I can look down and see the Beaver down below going by with that flat shine or sometimes a sparkle, and it catches you somewhere. It becomes part of your very being, right? Your identity. But the poem, just as it evokes the promise and the beauty, takes us into the sense of failure, right? The defeat of the hope. The predictable and familiar signs, the nettle-tangled orchards given up on, the rusted tipples in the mills. It's the kind of witness that makes us wince, right? G.K. Chesterton, a British writer and localist, says, people talk about history as if it's ruins, like there are these magnificent civilizations that once existed, and these buildings with massive pillars, and but now they're not anymore, and so it's over, and now we just walk around in the ruins. He said that's not history at all. That's not the way it works. He says what history actually is just a record of ideals that were attempted but never really realized. He says it's like you're finding projects that are partially completed and then abandoned. You had this vision, you had this dream, and for whatever reason, you just couldn't actually make it happen. And I kind of hear that as Anderson is thinking about this, right? This project begun, amity. What happens to it? Prosperity, right? We wish for so much. We long for so much. We get so tired of longing and wishing, and now I'm speaking as a full-blown middle-aged man who just turned 50 this past fall. But I'm reminded of a lyric by a songwriter named Mark Hurd. He describes us as penniless at the wishing well. Penniless at the wishing well. Where we've grown tired of wishing, tired of longing, we've just given up, nothing in my pocket. But Anderson wants us to think about promise. In this beautiful last part of the poem, I think it's possible to wash the slag dust from the leaves of sycamores and make them green. That's what I wonder. If we're really serious about promise, okay, do we have the courage? Do we have the desire? Do we have the insistence to wash off that dust from our buildings, from our streets, from our rivers, and of course, the hardest place of all, from our minds? Can we once more become a small town just starting up along the river? It's only possible if we're people like Nietzsche, who have the virtue of real world hope, who are going to light up when they get to somebody's in the beloved place, who are going to help you to get acclimated, adjusted, feel at home with everything they have, right? That's a virtue of hope that inspires promise, right? Think about somebody who, amidst whatever decay and disappointment exists, they still insist on moving toward the thing that has to be got to, right? That they have to find. Think about the mother who absolutely will not, refuses to give up on that son, on that daughter that she knows is capable of far more than they're showing, and does not need to be in that condition, right? The mother does not give up, right? That's the virtue of hope that we're talking about here. It moves unhesitatingly, right? With a willingness to sacrifice to make sure that the ideal is realized. Okay, the virtue of hope. Okay, so from a place with promise, how do you get from a place with promise to the promise, the particular promise of a place? And I'm going to suggest that the way that we get there is through an old and venerable ideal that's called citizenship. Citizenship. When we moved here, believe me, we heard all about Paradise Lost, Beaver Falls style. Forget Lancaster County. And a lot of the paradise that was lost, it seems to me, had to do with ice cream. If only Waits had stayed in business a few more years, that would have been such a great destination for us with our little strollers and our little boys, walking up there. If you get Bob Frazier, the Frage here, College Hill on Bob Frazier, colleague, mentor, friend in all things Beaver Falls. If you get Frage talking about Isley's ice cream, you'll have like 100 other memory connections popping all over the place just like this. This valley is filled with these powerful, rich, and attractive memories that we who aren't from here walk into, and you just feel like you're in the presence of, you're being swept along with them, right? And it's really easy for a certain kind of person to dismiss these memories with that great all-purpose epithet that's especially dear to people of the "it is what it is" school of wisdom, nostalgia. You're just a bunch of nostalgic people. Those days aren't coming by, blah, blah, blah. What if political and social hope actually depends on memories just like that? Memories of dear places and of dear people. What if promise depends on a sense of very solid and real connection to the good that was actually here? It was real, you can bank on it, you're never going to forget it, it changed your life, right? I have a living grandmother who's turning 90 this year, who just became this week a great-great-grandmother. When I think about my grandmother, I know that her days are coming to an end, and maybe very quickly. I am never going to forget that, my grandmother. I'm never going to forget the joy, the hope that has just always been part of her life. How dare I forget that, right? How dare we forget the good that is actually part of our lives? The reason we have this good in our lives is to build on it into the future, right? I mean, if the person that you love, if your grandmother, grandfather, favorite teacher, whoever it was, if they knew that you said, well, I'm really great, I'm really glad that you existed and you that was that good, but we have no chance of doing that today. That's to blaspheme them, right? That's to blaspheme their entire lives that they spent in this state of sacrifice for the sake of making this good real, right? So I think that don't pull out the nostalgia card, right? When you feel that sense of connection in a way that's tied to something that was genuinely good, we take that, we build on it, right? We do what we can with it. This is what I think. If both of these responses are present, a sense of connection to prior good, and a willingness to sacrifice in the present to make that good continue, then I think the promise of a given place is possible. I think it is possible. To be sure, the thing that happens is probably not going to look much like the thing you imagine it could look like, right? That's the way these things play out, right? But something's going to happen, it's going to make some genuine good take place. It's a very complicated world. We do not have the ability to just draw things up and put them into motion. We can't do that in our own families, let alone in something as complicated as a 10,000 person town, right? But we can make something happen if we move in good faith toward the genuine good. Especially if you have a cohort of committed people who are dedicated to these things. right? And so if you turn to the other side of the sheet that here Brad passed out, at the bottom, and there's a quote by one of the leading anthropologists of the 20th century, a woman named Margaret Mead, and she exhorts us thus: never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens could change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. This is a grand idea. Okay? This quickens hope. This was used by a screenwriter at the end of one of the episodes of West Wing to clinch the episode. It's cloaked the language of possibility, right? This group, it's not a formula. This group of citizens can change the world. It doesn't say that it will happen. There's no guarantee. But I submit to you that it is a starting place. In fact, I think it's the only starting place. Right? This cadre of companions who set out to do something. And they do it, and this is crucial, as citizens. And what does this mean? Right? This is one of those words that we say, but let's do a little bit of close thinking time. What were we before we were called citizens? Subjects. Subjects of the king. That's really real. That's really what we were prior to 1776. We were subjects to a king. Think about what that word means. Right? That means that we did the king's bidding. That's what we did. Your life was set. Your life was put in place by whatever the monarchy. And this is exactly, this clash over this is at the birthright of this nation that's made us even think about things in this long tradition of political history, like having a meeting tonight. You didn't do this kind of thing in England in 1580, right? But in the American grain, in the American tradition, citizenship became the alternative to being subjects. What do we mean by citizenship? Citizenship is collaboration among equals who are together responsible for the common good. Collaboration among equals who are together responsible. It's not the king. It's not somebody out there. We together as citizens are responsible for the common good. That at least is how Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, and friends thought about it as they were doing this really crucial spade work and trying to make possible some other conception for the for the commonwealths that were emerging about what it was that we were trying to do. Who knew what you were if you weren't part of a monarchy? I mean, that wasn't self-evident. No one had tried it in hundreds of years. A little bit in Switzerland, but they had to try to dream up what it meant not to be a subject, and this is what they came up. Citizens collaborating among equals for people who are part of this common good, who are working toward the common good. If democracy has a future, if Beaver Falls has a future, it will only be because people continue to embrace and practice the ideals of citizenship. Okay, so in the context of a place like this, of a small town trying to start up again along the river, what does it look like? Well, I think it might be helpful to suggest different kinds of citizens. That is to try to get us, this is kind of following where I'm going with the owl and the Lee, sort of thing here. That you have this spectrum of orientations and gifts and histories and minds. When we think about the kind of citizenship that's possible to aid the efforts, right, of civic renewal, what are some different, what's the range of contribution that people can make, right? Each kind of citizen that I'm going to describe occupies a certain kind of space, right? This is space that is going to be filled by somebody. There's no vacuum possible. There's always going to be people of some kind who are filling this kind of space for good or for ill, right? We're talking about citizens who are thus focused on filling this space for the sake of the common good. Franklin attached, if you read Franklin's autobiography, which I highly recommend, in fact, I'll be reading 60 pages of it between now and 11 o'clock tomorrow morning, as a matter of fact, for my colonial American history class. One of my favorite books. But Franklin is sort of the person who invents a lot of the actual real-world activities that help us understand what citizenship is. Like founding, for instance, libraries, right? Colleges, discussion groups, starting up a fire, a firehouse in Philadelphia. Street cleaning was a Franklin thing, right? The stove, you know the Franklin stories. Why did he not take out a patent on his stove, the Franklin stove? He thought it was immoral to do that. He thought this was an invention capable that would be for the good of the people. Have it, use it, right? Franklin's terms for this are public spiritedness. Be public spirited, he said, not private spirited. The commonweal, commonwealth, right? These are the key words for these 18th century Republicans, right? So either you fill the space as citizens or you leave it to the alternative, people who construct the world purely for private gain, with all the ugliness that entails, which we know very well, right? Think about Old Man Potter. Anybody ever seen It's a Wonderful Life? Think about Old Man Potter. We're talking about users as the alternative to citizens, who would just look at the world, take it in, and try to use it. What an underrated ideal. Isn't that amazing? We've devoted the last 100 years to developing this elaborate school system, and who cares about intelligence? I wish I felt like that wasn't true, but does not seem to be. This is what's registering on our minds, and we need intelligence. We can all probably think of great examples of people who seem to have a knack and a gift and a vocation, a calling for filling political and economic space in these ways. And we can think of a lot of local examples. One that, I'll just give one example that's not exactly Beaver Falls, but part of the surrounding area, is the YMCA. I started to work out there 5 years ago. At this point, 3 out of the 5 members of my immediate family work there, are employed there. And here's what I discovered about the Y. It gathers people across generations, across social classes, across political orientations, across ethnicities, across race. This morning, as I was combing my hair to my left, I heard 2 guys talking about the country club that they both used to be members of when their daughters were in a swim club. And to my right, I heard 2 guys throwing around the words Smith and Wesson. Like, real close to each other, right? That's the way life is at the Y. There's a little bit of jostling in the morning. Is it going to be Good Morning America that's on the screen? Is it going to be Fox and Friends, right? The older men there, I love this. The older men there in their 70s and 80s, they're the cool kids. At least when I work out there. And this is what's really interesting about this to me. One, they go way back, a lot of them, to neighborhoods where they grew up together. And they love, of all the sports that they love, and these are the sports guys, right? Guess what it is? High school football and high school basketball. Forget the Steelers, right? Now they'll talk about that, but where their heart is, and I know this because they bet on it every week, is still in the old world of their childhood. The regional connections. These are 70. My friend Ron if he didn't have 2 artificial knees, he'd still be going to see Central Valley play football every Friday night. Ron is a 79-year-old retired engineer who grew up in Aliquippa and went to Geneva College studying engineering. And Ron has taken it upon himself to teach my 18-year-old son, Luke, Geneva College's alma mater, which I don't even know. That's the kind of connection I'm talking about. That's filling our political and economic space with something that's trying to honor, in an imperfect way, the ideals of citizenship, reminding us what it is that makes our life good. Very, very basic ways. Any community needs to be people with those of us who take it upon themselves to, at their own cost, fill these spaces for the sake of the common. The fillers. Okay, second F word. Formers. Formers. Citizens who make it their task to shape other citizens. To make sure the citizens keep coming, right? They realize that something is going to form us. Human creatures do not just sort of turn out to be blobs, right? There's going to be some institutions, some influences that are going to give us a particular kind of shape. What's it going to be? The citizens have this burden, this impulse to say, I'm going to devote at least a big part of my life to making sure that people understand and live out these ideals. The most widely read book in the 19th century in America, besides the Bible, was Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was published in 1852. Lincoln met Harriet Beecher Stowe, the author, at one point, and said, you're the woman who started the Civil War. And she has her wisest character in the novel say this at one point. Training children is the staple work of the human race. Training children is the staple work of the human race, and that has not changed. So forming institutions are what any community needs, right? What am I talking about? Family, churches, schools. How about the kitchen table as a forming institution? Rec leagues, Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, businesses, big brothers, big sisters, tiger paws, right? Once our boys and girls are in association with these institutions and these people, you look at them and you say, aha, I can tell you've been under the influence of fill in the blank, right? Such and such a person, such and such a church, such and such an organization. When our kids started to play sports here, we realized that the youth leagues here were dedicated to developing serious athletes, right? But I realized too that there was more than an athletic end that was in view, and I was very moved by this. Our son Luke made the Bantam League basketball team in 6th grade, which was a great accomplishment. He hadn't made it when he tried out the previous year, and so I would go around to these different games that they were playing. And one February, we went up to Lincoln High in Elwood City. So he was playing with the Beaver Falls team, and I was just sort of overwhelmed at one moment when I was just this whole atmosphere. If you've ever been in the gym, is this cradle gym, kind of like the vintage of this room actually. And you just feel like somehow you're in the guts of something old and real. And I started to jot down some thoughts once I heard a little girl yell down to her brother, little like 8-year-old girl, "Nice pick, Joey!" Like she knew what a pick is, like that 8-year-old girl. So I started to jot down this poem, and I liked it, and I've written a lot of poems over the years, but this is the only one that I have published, that I got published by the Post-Gazette. Hoops at Lincoln High, it's on the second sheet, that second slide that I turned in. And this is what inspired me with this forming. "Nice pick, Joey," shouts an 8-year-old girl, sun streaming, winter breaking, spring streaking through. Old gym at Lincoln High, where moms, dads, grandpas, aunts watch 6th grade boys with 60-something reps and years of multiplied talent. Rivals from river towns, black and white and tan and red, race up the floor, down the floor, legs and arms and swiveling heads. From one sport to the next, the mother remarks. As the beat goes on, the ball bounces in, and we all taste some joy. That's forming. I am so grateful that my kids have a chance to be with coaches, to be with refs, right? To be with parents. We're going to help them understand how to play a game. A game that's structured on ideals like what? Equality, justice, fairness, hard work, opportunity, achievement, right? This helps us to become what we're made to become. And guess what? It's not just kids who need to be formed. I coach youth soccer and have, every now and then I teach Sunday school. And when I do things like that, it forms me too. It's a shape that easily slips away, right? The shape of the citizen. So formers take it as their calling to shape character, body, soul, and mind, wherever they are, to make sure that it goes on, right? Okay, third, framers. These are people who show us, by the way they present the world to us, what the thing actually is that we're living in, right? Framers. Sometimes I think it's worth it to step back and think about how much the way we frame the world affects what we actually see, right? Try it sometime just by doing this. Okay? You'll see things differently depending on the frame, right? If your primary frame is the small screen of a smartphone, it may not prepare you to see 7th Avenue or the Beaver River. If my primary frame is the New York Times, it may not help me to think terribly well about what's possible in Beaver County. If my primary frame is Fox News, it may not equip me to think as well as I need to about the kind of political divisions that manifested themselves in this county and other places in the last election. My primary frame is BuzzFeed. I may not get the depth I need to see much of anything. The curious thing about human beings is how much we need to be reminded, how much we need to remember what's actually there in front of us. And that's what framers understand. Framers seize the opportunity to help you to grasp the thing that is actually going on. Perception sharpened, right? They give us ideas about how to move in our circumstance. One of the pleasures I've had this year is to get to know a guy named Jeff Sneddon, who's a local framer. Anybody know the name Jeff Sneddon, by the way? Writes a weekly column in the Beaver County Times about local history. Very dedicated. He's developing video series. He's trying to help us to remember to see who we are and where we are, right? So we need sermons, articles, poems, speeches, songs, books, paintings, cartoons, letters, murals, blog posts, right? Things to help us to grasp what's actually here. Newspapers, printing presses, magazines, lecture series, record labels, book clubs, coffee shops, libraries, art galleries, things that frame the world for us. Okay, this all sounds pretty, I'd say, idealistic. Because anybody knows that when you get people actually talking about what's actually there, they tend to not agree about what's actually there. Right? Contention inevitably follows, if we're lucky. Because without that kind of contention, you don't get a sharpened sense of what's happening. You fall back into the kind of sleepiness of agreement. Right? That's not the way the world is. That's not who we are. We need to be sharpened. Iron sharpens iron, as the proverb goes. Right? Contention is inevitable. It's going to happen. It has to happen for us to move forward. What we need to do is be prepared for it. And that's not just contention about how we frame things, it's contention about how we fill political and economic space. It's a people, right? It's contention about how we form children. We have disagreements about that? Absolutely. And we should have disagreements about that. For one thing, we don't all have a guaranteed way to do it, but we know it's going to work out right. Just look around, right? And we do have disagreements about deep philosophical and religious things. That's human, right? The best thing we can do is be prepared to disagree, create structures in which we can have these disagreements, and then find ways to live together with our differences, right? Now that may sound idealistic, but I submit to you that it's not, right? Living with our differences. Because if we, in the midst of contention, just back off, right, and say, well, we can't get along, this town can't do anything, we don't see things the same way, we have too much division in our past, right? Then what is going to happen to that space, the civic space? It's going to be filled by people who show up, and their look in their eyes says, I see an opportunity for me, because no one else. And who knows by what standards they're going to operate in public sphere. We don't. That's why democracy was invented in the first place. Okay? So either we learn to disagree and create spaces in which we can have honest, frank, sharp, respectful, open debate, or else we might as well just close shop and say, hey, let the elites rule, let the oligarchy rule, let such and such a clan rule, and we'll hope for the best. I think that our grandchildren, I think that our great-great-grandchildren deserve better. We turn instead to a sharpened, intelligent liberality and generosity in which we give space for disagreement, and then we do our best. Right? And especially if we can get cohorts of self-sacrificing people of the kind that Margaret Mead talked about, right? Small groups of thoughtful, committed citizens, we'll find ways forward. We hope. Right? A practical vision can emerge. That's the kind of thing we're going to be talking about in the next two sessions, I think. Okay, so at the end of this, can we find paradise? Can we make it? I don't think we can. Paradise? Paradise? The paradise for us, in this context, may just be the give and take, just like this, right? Of everyday life, everyday people, humbled by their common circumstance, willing to work together, and dream about something better. Maybe inspired by a vision of paradise, inspired by the high ideals associated, at least in a lot of religious faiths, with the ideal possibilities of human beings, human flourishing. G.K. Chesterton, the Englishman I referred to earlier, in one of his great novels, a novel I would recommend for any local book clubs looking for one, called The Napoleon of Notting Hill, a thrilling story. In this novel, he says, look, this is what we need to do. We need to develop a world in which it's possible to have a soul in daily life. To have a soul in one's daily life. He says in this that the only happiness, the only universality is clinging to something. And what should we cling to? It's the new things that men tire of, he says. It's the old things that are young. One of the places I go to in Beaver County to try to feel young is Brady's Run Park. I spent hours, I bet hundreds of hours over these years hiking trails, walking by the lake, by the stream. Seems like it's 2,000 acres are just the right size for me. Somehow I'm never bored. Somehow there's always some place that I want to go to that I can go. And I experience the kind of recovery, reinvigoration that makes us young, right? So I'm grateful, very grateful in ways that if I could, I would express more eloquently to the fillers who decades ago dedicated themselves to filling that space with a park, a commons that belongs to all of us, right? It helps me get some soul in daily life. I find their dreams inspiring. There are two trailheads in Brady's Run Park. If you walk about 20 minutes from each one, you find picnic tables on the trail. They're broken down now, so don't think you're picnic, right? But I love the fact that at some point somebody thought, let's get picnic tables up on. I don't know how they even got them there, right? One of them is up Devil's Back, the big one that goes up across from the ice skating rink. I mean, I don't know how you got a picnic table up there, but they did because they imagined that someday residents of Beaver County would want to go hike and take a picnic. Thank you. I'm moved by that dream. I'm grateful for the formers who made it possible for those men and women to dream that dream. Somebody had to shape them to do that. That wasn't automatic, right? And I'm grateful for the framers who vouched for the idea of putting our collective commonwealth, our money, toward that end. It's worth it, right? It's worth it. Parks have fallen on hard times, though, haven't they? The number of visitors is down. State and county budgets are slashing funding to parks all across our state. And that is leaving us with diminished goods. It's a sadness. It's a deep sadness. And the reason it's such a sadness is because it symbolizes a broader sense of malaise, of distress that we're in, as we move inward as a people, and we allow other forces to fill and to form and to frame our world in ways that do not have civic ideals in view. Friends, this is a place of promise. Beaver Falls is in a state that yet calls itself a commonwealth. A commonwealth. That's an ideal that was venerated by people like Jefferson and Franklin and others who at that moment of national crisis said, this is what we want to become, a place that's known for commonwealth. Not private wealth, not personal gain, commonwealth. If we devote ourselves to citizenship, I think we have a chance of gaining civic renewal. That is, I think we have a chance of being made young. We may just come to see ourselves as a place of promise, as a small town just starting up along the way. Thank you.